Hi, this week we're speaking to Dr. Gruber on his work on wild chimpanzee tool use. So Dr. Gruber, could you give us a summary of the paper, please?
Yeah, so this paper is called Travel Foster Tool Use in Wild Chimpanzees, and it's basically a summary of about 8 years of research that we have been conducting in the Bidongo forest in Uganda. And there we've been working with a particular community of chimpanzees. These are famous for being tool users, but our chimps are actually quite famous for being not really big tool users. And we've been trying, I mean, since I started my PhD and during subsequent work, we've been trying to understand why these chimps don't use so many tools, and also in what context they would actually use tools. So to do that, I designed an experiment that's called the honey trap experiment. And the honey trap experiment is very simple. It's basically digging a hole in a log, put some honey that cannot be accessed without a tool, and then just leave it in the pathway of a chimpanzee and see what the chimpanzee is going to do when they encounter the log. So when I started this work, I worked in several communities, and then we could find that a normal chimpanzee community, like the Kibale chimpanzee, like Kanyawara community that's in Kibale, they use sticks. So they found the hole and then they were using sticks. But our chimps in Sonso, they don't know anything about sticks. So the only thing that they knew was, okay, I can actually transfer behavior that's called leaf sponging. So leaf sponging is when you collect a lot of leaves, you put them in your mouth, you roll them, and then you make a sponge, and then they put it in the water and then use that to drink. And very surprisingly, our chimps decided to use that behavior to engage with the honey spot and try to get the honey, but they never figured out anything about stick use. So this is a bit the context. And what we wanted to look at in that particular paper is make a summary of these 8 years of research and try to understand what would actually drive them to engage with the experiment, and as well as what would be the factor that would really foster tool use. And to do that, we basically had to go dig in your data and just look at all the long-term data we have about what happened around the experiment. So how was the food offer, how much the chimps had to travel during that time. And that's a bit what we wanted to do, is just to integrate both ecology and cognition together and just see that, well, when you put all of that into models, what we find is that our chimps were going to engage the most with our experiment when there was not so much good conditions. So the ecological conditions were a bit bad, so they didn't have much food around, and they had to travel a lot to get that food. And the longer this situation had lasted, so we were taking into account like 3 months before the experiment. So the longer a situation, quite bad situation, happened, the more they were engaging with the whole. And the second thing we found, which was actually very interesting, was when you did actually the same analysis, but only based on the use of tools in the experiment, it was actually only the travel that they had spent right the week before the experiment that was really directly connected to the use of a tool in the experiment. So wrapping this up, the idea is like we find that chimpanzees are not random tool users, and especially our chimps were said to have a very good environment. They're not going to go engage with honey experiments to try to get honey that's really hard to get, because you have to really think about a good solution. If you have a very nice juicy fig tree, which is like 200 meters away. So they will actually mostly engage with the experiment when there is not much available, and that they know that anyway they have to walk a lot to access the food. So, why not give it a try? Because you might be happy, and honey is obviously a great treat for the chimps. So that's a bit the idea of this paper.
So the ones that were using the tools there and sort of making the hole and everything, they're the ones that had to travel. So were they normally the younger ones and the fitter ones, or was it all of the chimpanzees were traveling to then get the honey?
So we're not really sure that there is an age effect, actually. So we, first of all, the experiment was designed in a way that we were aiming a bit more for some younger individuals in particular than others. So that might also contribute to this effect we could find about having younger ones more likely to use tools than others. But generally, we got, individuals of all age classes.
You talked about other chimpanzees from other sites using different tools. Yeah. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about that, please?
So the idea of the honey trap experiment at the beginning was to test two communities of chimpanzees. So one in Budongo forest, where we knew that what we supposed was that the chimps in Budongo were not using any sticks. So we only had ever observed them using leaf sponge. In comparison, in Kibale, it was known that the chimps were using naturally sticks to get honey. So the point is, by doing the same experiment, controlled exactly the same way in the two communities, we could show that one community of chimpanzee, both communities were basically relying on their cultural knowledge, but one of them had no stick use in their knowledge. So they just had to dig into their mind and think, okay, what kind of tool can I use to actually get the honey? And that's what we got, that these chimps basically thought, well, maybe I could give it a try with a leaf sponge, even if I've never used them to get honey in my life, because I've been using them to get water and that's it. While in Kibale, the prediction was that the chimps were going to use a stick because they had already been observed using a stick to get honey. And that's what happened. And obviously we were quite pleased to see that, they were really, their behavior in the experiment really fitted their cultural knowledge.
Oh, that's really interesting. Can this work be used to understand how maybe fossil hominins are using tools as well?
I think it can. I mean, there's always a big debate on whether chimps can be, relevant models of human evolution, and some people are not necessarily friendly with this idea. Others are much more sympathetic. The important point is to say that all these experiments have to do with tools that are perishable. So whether the leaf sponge or the sticks, all of this stuff doesn't fossilize. So for humans, it's great to find like stones and connect them to different culture, like the Herculean, the older one, whatever. But we don't know what our human ancestors, and even the ones before the Herculean or something, what they were doing with perishable stuff, because we can just infer that they were using maybe sticks or other things. But the good thing is with chimps, we have a living picture of hominoids, at least. So apes, and we are all apes. So we have apes that are using not only stones in some side, but also like sticks and leaf sponge and so on. And in this respect, I think these data are really interesting to see how chimps are likely to use certain tools in certain contexts. And the other thing we know is that human evolution happened in a context of ecological variation. And this particular study is really aiming at understanding how ecological variation over a long time. So like here it's 8 years, but obviously you would want to know about 100 years or 1,000 years, how this impacted the chimps. And this is a little contribution that shows, well, chimps are not going to behave the same if basically they are well fed and that the food is right next door, or if they are not, it's not like they're starving, but maybe they're a bit hungry, and just being a bit hungry makes you try your luck a bit more to get the honey, because it's always good to try.
So sort of the effect on sort of adapting. So if you're hungry, you're more likely to try more things to try and get access to food like honey, which is tasty and like nutrient rich kind of food.
Yeah, I would say, the point is not to be really, as I say, not starving, but basically be a tiny bit hungry. It's probably like this kind of little thing that makes you, well, I'm going to pay attention to what I can get in my environment. It's like, oh, look at it, it's one front. Well, it's hard to get, but maybe I can spend a bit more of my time engaging with it just to try to get the honey, because yeah, it would be valuable if I managed to get the honey. That's a bit the way you can see it. At the same time, if you're starving, then definitely it's not going to be a good thing, because you're not going to lose your time on something is hard to get. So it's really just this middle ground where you're not starving to death, but you're a bit hungry, and that's probably helping you really focusing a bit about extracting everything as possible.
So you said this research was sort of the accumulation of 8 years. So what's next for this research?
Well, at the moment, I'm interested in several things. I mean, I'm still interested in continuing this idea about energetics and see how the energetics, combine with cognition. So how much, your physiological status, or in general, the context, the social context, the ecological context, whichever context you can think about, influences the use of tools. So we cannot just think about chimps or humans as, doing things without any context. So all of this I really want to take into account. And the second thing I'm really interested in at the moment is we have started a new project. So we have actually the luck of having a forest that just halfway between Kibale and Budongo. So in Kibale they're using sticks, in Budongo they're not using sticks. And we have the Bugoma forest, which is right in the middle. And the point is to try to correlate, how the composition of the forest, as well as whatever happens, if it's more comparable to Budongo, more comparable to Kibale, allow us to predict successfully that chimps are using sticks there or not. Project I'm really working on hard at the moment, trying to understand this new population of chimps in Bugoma and try to understand, if they are more like Kibale team or Sonso team, and what it can tell us about this ecological pressure on tool use in wild chimpanzees. And obviously, the good thing is working in East Africa, we're just right next to the Great Rift, and anything that we have here, we can try to extrapolate a bit about how much this can model human evolution.
Wow, it's really interesting. It's working in some really interesting directions as well. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll put a link to the paper below this video. And thank you again. It's been really interesting.